What was that? That right up there. No, but we. All right. We got the microphone on. I think we're good. Good morning. How's everybody doing this morning? Well, good. I always think it's fun whenever we get to start a new quarter, and I always enjoy teaching a class for the first time when I hadn't been in there with that particular group for a class. So I'm looking forward to this. Let me introduce myself. I know that a lot of you know me, but I'm going to assume that not all of you do. I think some of you who have been here for a long time know me, but I'm Tyler Boyd. I am married to Heather Boyd now. She was Heather Robertson. That's Troy and Novine's daughter. She grew up here, and I grew up in McMinnville, Tennessee. We met at Freed Hardeman, and it took us a few years to get around to the timing being right, but we ended up dating and getting married, and we've lived in Olive Branch, Mississippi for about the last 8 years or so, and moved down here last summer. So now, what I want to do before we really get going is I want to get y'all's names. I'm not good with names. Some of you, I've asked you your names, and I don't remember them because I don't use it on a regular basis. Some of you, I'm really supposed to know your name, but sometimes I just forget it. So, and then some of you, I do know your name, but I'm gonna go ahead and get everybody's name before we get going. And if you would, tell me your name, and if you would like to share, I would be very curious to learn is there a subject or a book of the Bible or a text or something that you would be interested in maybe having a class over? It won't necessarily make a difference this quarter. Maybe we can touch on that subject if it's related to what we're going through. But if not, it might help me to where down the road, if I get a chance to teach this class again, maybe it'll help me think through what might be a good subject to study and get ready for. So if you would, tell me your name, and then tell me what is either a subject or a book of the Bible or a section or something that you think would be interesting in doing a class over. I'm going to start in the back. We're going to do the left side first. I'm going to start in the back and work my way forward. So, all the way back here. Is what? Dean. Yeah, Dean. Okay. You've helped me with my car a few times, and I'm very grateful. I'm glad there's people like you for people like me who don't know what they're doing. So, Dean, you got anything you'd be interested in studying?
Yes, Ecclesiastes.
Oh, that'd be a good one. Ecclesiastes. All right. And then right over here.
Justin Elliott.
Justin. And your wife's name? Justin and Julie. All right. Y'all got anything that y'all would like for me to jot down as an idea? Okay. If you think of anything, just let me know. All right. Back here.
Perry Jones.
Perry. All right, Perry. You got an idea?
More about music and the different congregations.
Like music and worship?
Yes.
Okay. Be good study. All right. And right up here.
Richard Adams.
Richard and
Michelle Cloud.
Michelle. All right. Got a suggestion for me?
Look at James.
James. That's good.
With what's happening in the world, the last one that, 66 chapter.
What was that? I'm sorry. Ezekiel. The last part of Ezekiel. Digging into the prophets. There's some good stuff there. Now, wait a minute. You said 66. Were you thinking Isaiah? Well, anyway, you can look it up. Just speak up when you find it. But, I mean, Ezekiel's good too. All right. And then, one more time again. I asked you just a second ago. Deborah. Deborah. Thank you, Deborah. Genesis? Janice. Oh, okay. Janice's daughter. Okay. Good. Do you have something you'd be interested in studying? Matthew. All right. Then over here on the left.
Bo and CC.
One more time.
Bo and CC.
Bo and Cece. I'm going to start with first names. I will get those last names maybe one day, I promise. But all right, well, all right. Do you have a suggestion? Okay. All right. Shelley and Melvin. Okay. Okay. All right. Joey and Morgan. You have a suggestion?
I said more about
The prophets. I have done a class on the prophets before. I could probably dust off and do it again if I needed to. So, be good. All right. Elena. One more time. Elana. Elena, do you have a suggestion? Okay. Nancy Ruth, okay. No. The book of Ruth. Thank you, Miss Ruth. I'm just kidding. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you. All right. Okay, Miss Dolores, do you have a suggestion? Okay. Erica. Do you have a suggestion for me? Okay, let's start on this side, in the back, the very back row.
Chris Smithy.
Chris. And do you have a suggestion?
Anything with Saul or Paul, St. Paul.
Okay. A study of Paul. Okay. John and Cat. Okay.
I'd be better at Christian parents.
Parenting. Yeah, me too. All right, in the back right-hand corner. Colette. Okay, Miss Colette, do you have a suggestion? Prayer. All right.
Chris and Sissy Bulk.
Chris and Sissy.
Sissy.
Okay, do you have a suggestion?
Try Ezekiel.
Ezekiel? Ezekiel's interesting. In a lot of ways, it's kind of like Revelation, the Old Testament, with all the weird images and stuff. Yeah. All right, let's start here. We got. Okay, great. What?
I'll study
Whatever. All right. Andrea. Do you have a suggestion, Andrea? Roger. Do you have a suggestion? Okay. And Clayton. Do you have a suggestion, Clayton? All right. Amy. Do you have a suggestion?
Some of the things we say that are in the Bible but are really not, such as God doesn't give you more than you can handle, or that Eve ate an apple and it says fruit.
That's interesting. I'm gonna put down traditional teachings, but not in Bible. All right. I know this one. Do you have a suggestion? Okay, from another no, Troy. Okay. Do you have a suggestion?
You know, I think if we don't get into the history of the things in the Old Testament, if you don't know history, you're bound to repeat it. And that makes a lot of mistakes.
Well, great. Great suggestion. We might have to do that. All right. Kathy, do you have one?
Maybe Ephesians.
Ephesians? Okay. All right. Linda? Do you have a suggestion? Dan?
I like you said about prayer.
Prayer. Okay.
Dale, Kevin.
Dale. And Dale, do you have a suggestion?
Something about the kingdom, all the misconceptions that the world has about the kingdom.
Oh, that would be kingdom. I've thought about doing a class on that before, and I've never had, but I think that would be a good one. Now, here's the thing, though, y'all. When I'm looking at my list, I have very, very few repeats. Like, when I was in the young adult class, we had like one or two topics that came up like, it was split like a third between 3 different topics. But anyway, so it was easy in there. But here, I don't have many repeats. That means that the list is kind of wide open next time. That's okay. That's all right. Well, those are some good ideas, good suggestions. I appreciate it. All right. As you can see on the PowerPoint behind me, we're going to be, during this quarter, we're going to be doing, this is going to be a real high-level class. It's going to be an overview of Genesis through 2 Kings. And I have taught this class, I think, if I'm counting right, this is my 5th time teaching this particular subject. I taught it twice up in Olive Branch with a couple of different groups up there before I moved down here. I taught it to the teen class a couple of quarters ago, and I taught it in the young adult class last quarter. And every time I teach it, it seems like it's a little bit different. And one thing that I don't know why this is, but sometimes auditorium classes are just different. Something, I bet if I were to take this same group and we were all sitting in a classroom, all of a sudden there'd be a lot more questions and discussion. For whatever reason, auditorium classes, everybody seems to be quiet, but that's okay. Feel free, this is y'all's class, feel free to speak up with questions and comments and discussion if you want to. But if you're somebody who prefers it, I mean, just because you're being quiet doesn't mean you're not listening and learning. And if you're more comfortable doing that, nothing wrong with that. And we'll just kind of take it as it goes, whatever y'all want to do. But never hesitate to raise your hand or speak up. And I want it to be y'all's class and beneficial for y'all. A couple of different reasons why I love this class. I love the Bible stories. When you're little, and you grow up in Sunday school, that's where most of you spend time talking about creation and Abraham and Moses and Joseph and all these characters. And for whatever reason, when we get older, it seems like the subject matter switches to where we spend more time like in the letters of Paul. And there's great stuff there. I love those studies too. But I just love the Bible stories. But at the same time, one thing that I want to try to do in this class, we're not going to go, it's high level. We're not going to spend just tons of time on any one story, but I want us to take a step back and think about how they all fit together. One example or an illustration you might think of, have you ever seen like a mosaic picture, like a photo, where if you zoom in, it's actually made up of a whole bunch of little bitty photos. But then they have them arranged in such a way so that when you zoom out, you see a face or something like that. Have y'all probably seen one of those. It can be helpful to think about the Old Testament in that way. There are some incredible stories that you really can like zoom in and it's a great picture in and of itself. But there's some other really neat things that you can see when you zoom out. And you think about how is creation connected to the Tower of Babel, connected to Abraham, connected to Moses, connected to David. How do they all work together? And when you do that, there's some really neat themes that you start to see, and you get to see how the entire Old Testament, it's pointing ahead to Christ. And sometimes we don't see it as clearly when we're just looking at the individual stories. So what we're going to do is we are going to kind of overview these books. These are the history books in the Old Testament. We're just going to show the overall direction. As we come across some really important sections, some really important texts, we'll take a couple minutes, slow down and make sure we point those out. But I think it's a really, really neat to take a step back and look at the Old Testament in that way. Another thing that I want to do in this class is I want to encourage all of you, if you have not read these books for yourself, or if you haven't read these books for yourself in a long time, I want to encourage you to be a Bible reader. There is some great reading in this part of your Bible. And we can't touch on it all. If we're doing an overview, we're not going to get into the depth that it all deserves. But maybe just enough to whet your appetite, to say, it has been a while since I've read through the book of Judges. I should go back and refresh myself of everything that's there. And so I want to encourage you to, if you haven't read through these books in a while, start with Genesis 1 and work your way through. It would really be worth your while. So that's the general direction of the class. As far as how fast or how slow we'll go, a lot of it will just be me figuring it out and adjusting as we go, whether I need to hit the gas pedal and go faster or hit the brake and slow down a little bit. And it's going to be up to you. If you want me to slow down, just say, hey, let's talk about this for a minute. We'll try to do that. All right. Is everybody ready to get started with the book of Genesis? We're not going to finish Genesis this morning, but everybody ready for that? Anybody got any questions or comments or anything before we dig in? Okay. The book of Genesis, big picture. You can divide the book of Genesis into two main parts of the book. Genesis chapters 1 through 11 covers all the way from creation to the Tower of Babel. It's a span of at least 2,000 years. It might be more than that, but it covers a lot of ground in just these first few chapters in the Bible. And the focus of these chapters are on God and the whole world and all of mankind as a whole. And this sets the stage for the second part of the book of Genesis, which starts with Abraham in chapter 12. And it goes all the way through the end of the book. What's different when you get to chapter 12 is no longer does the book of Genesis focus on the world as a whole, but it focuses in on just one particular family, the family of Abraham. And whereas the first part covers about 2,000 or more years, the second part covers just 4 generations. You've got Abraham, and then his son Isaac, and then his son Jacob, and then Jacob's sons, his 12 sons. And that's where the book focuses in after you get to chapter 12. Tying these two sections together is one of the really important texts in the Bible that we're going to be looking at. And that is God's promises that he made to Abraham in Genesis chapter 12, which is really the hinge point, the transition there. So that's the overview of what is covered in the book of Genesis. Let's look at some of the important texts, starting with the beginning. Genesis chapters 1 and 2, the creation of the world and Adam and Eve being placed in the Garden of Eden. Now, who can quote from me from memory? Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. Somebody quote that for me. Genesis 1, verse 1. Fantastic. Thank you. So, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, probably one of the first memory verses that a lot of us learned when we were young. It goes in verse 2 and it says, what God started with. It says, the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. So you start with darkness and void, or emptiness and just dark disorder is where you start. Genesis chapter 1 is the 7 days of creation. I think most of us are familiar with Genesis chapter 1. But one important thing that I want to point out before we go much further, actually I'm going to point out a couple of different important things from Genesis chapter 1. First thing is where Genesis chapter 1 ends. The last verse of Genesis 1, and God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning the sixth day. One of the most important things we need to remember before we go any further is that this world, God created it to be good. The world is not like a bad thing that God wants for us to escape and get away from, and we're going to talk about that. But God created it to be good. Now, does that mean that everything in the world is good today? Obviously not. You just look at the news from this weekend, and it's very apparent that something has gone horribly wrong in the world. But that is not how God created it to be. God created the world to be good. All right. Another very important thing to notice from Genesis chapter 1 is that God created man in his image. Can I have someone who would be willing to read out loud? Everybody can hear you. Let's read verses 26 through... how far do I want to go? Let's just go 26 and 27 for now. Genesis 1, 26 and 27. If somebody could read that out loud for me.
Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let him rule over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them.
All right. I want to hear your thoughts on this. When you read that God created man in his image, what comes to your mind? What do you think that means? What do you think about when you think about God created man in his image? Anybody have a thought?
Is it the spirit that we're created in, or is it the body that we
That is a great question. And I'm sorry, I'm not going to offer an answer because when you read it, it doesn't really spell out. It doesn't say, like sometimes the Bible raises questions that it doesn't just answer as plainly as you want, but it raises that question. Like, what is it talking about here? Is it talking about, well, God is spirit and God gave us spirits? Is it some sense in the fact, like, is it something about the way we look? Like, that's a really good question. Anybody have a thought?
I think because it says let us, he's referring to all three, the Trinity,
Okay.
which would give us spirit, soul, and body.
Interesting. So there's different, so God, and the Trinity is an interesting study. So you've got God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. And they're all three different. And at the same time, they're all three the same. And that's kind of what the Trinity is. They're different and the same at the same time, and it's like us. What was it? Soul, spirit, and mind. They're different, but they're also the same. There's just one you. But yeah, that's interesting. That's an interesting thought. Anybody else?
You go back to Strong's and look up the image, and it says resemblance.
The resemblance.
We resemble that means we look exactly like.
There is some sense. I'm going to put a couple things. I'm going to go ahead and just fill this slide up here. So, if we are God's image, and that's the main thing that we can tell at this point. It doesn't really explain it in all the detail that we might want, but there's some sense in which mankind is supposed to look like God, right? We're supposed to resemble him in some way. A few different ways that might be. One, we should resemble his character. When we see what God is like, we should try to look like that. That's how God created us to be. What is fresh on our mind here in Genesis 1? What has God been doing? He is a creator and a life giver. And it's interesting that right here, right after he says that we're made in his image, if you just read one verse later, what's the next thing he says to them? And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. You be a creator and a life giver like he is. That's what God's been doing. Now the job is yours. Okay? You go fill the earth. This is another interesting aspect where when he says, go back to verse 26. Then God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over every and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. And then you go down to verse 28. And God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion or rule, depending on your translation. I've got ESV if you're curious. English Standard. If you have New King James, I think it says rule. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the heavens, and over every creeping thing that moves on the earth. You know, isn't it interesting? Don't you think that God could have just decided that he was going to do that on his own? God made the earth. He could just rule it directly. But instead, he gave that job to Adam and Eve and to mankind. There is a sense in which God's rule over creation, he delegated that job to mankind. I want you to rule over this world that I have made. He partners with mankind. He wants for us to do what he created us to do. He wants to work through mankind. I also think it's worth noting, in this list of everything that God commanded man to have dominion over, there is one part of creation that is not mentioned. Did anybody catch what it was? Not over other people. And that's going to be an important theme that we're going to see as we go. Is you get to see, even as early as like when you get to Babel and into Egypt, and you have Pharaoh and his where he's enslaving the Israelites, and then you get on into where Israel wanted to have a king like the other nations instead of simply submitting to God's rule. The right to rule over other people was always reserved for God. That's not my job. It's not my job to go creating rules and dominions for you to follow. We're supposed to follow him. Okay, so, but those are just some of the different things that we see here. You know, in some sense, we're supposed to resemble God. It's also interesting, this word image, it's the exact same word that you see where God commanded in the Ten Commandments, God created Israel not to make any graven image. That's how the pagans would worship, is they would have their God, and then their God would have an image, a statue, an idol that they would worship. Why is it that God doesn't have an idol like all the other gods did? He already has his image in the world, and it's supposed to be us. And that brings you to another point. If you wanted to honor one of these other gods, what would you do? Well, you would go bow down to their statue, and you would give honor and glory and make sacrifices to that statue. If you want to honor God, what do? You love his image, and you honor his image. Shouldn't that impact how we think about other people and how we treat them? When you're dealing with another person, you are dealing with the image of God. And if you want to honor God, you better treat that person the way that you would want God to be honored. So there's a lot there to think about just in Genesis 1. All right, any other thoughts or questions?
One thing I think about when I think about this, what our image is supposed to look like, I can't help it. Go to Galatians 3:27. For as many of you as put on Christ and clothed yourself in Christ.
That's right.
What do we look like when we come up out
really good thought, really good thought. And that's one way, one thing we're going to see through a lot of this is it is pointing you ahead to the New Testament. When the New Testament talks about putting on Christ, when we're supposed to be Christ-like, well, what is it calling us to do? The same thing we were created for in the first place, to reflect God's image. We're supposed to live in a way that when people look at you, they say, okay, well, that's what God is like. They're acting in a godly way. That's a good point. Anybody else? What we are going to talk about on Wednesday night is going to be the fall, which is, it's going to cover the rest of this first section in the book of Genesis. One thing that I've noticed quite often when people talk about the fall, they usually have one Bible story in mind. You know what they're usually thinking about? Adam and Eve and the fruit and the snake and that scene. That is where sin gets introduced into the world. And I think rightfully so, that is the fall. But if we're reading through the Bible as a whole, and we're thinking about how all of these different stories fit together, the fall in the Bible is not only the story of Adam and Eve, but there are a series of stories that are recorded here in Genesis 3 through 11. And when you look at a big picture, they really all fit together. And you could call them all together the fall of mankind. Let's see. We might get into that one tonight. So you've got Adam and Eve in the garden. You've got Cain and Abel, the first murder. After that, you get introduced to the lineage that came after Cain. And there's a short story that we don't talk about a lot, but it's interesting, the story of Lamech in Genesis chapter 4, which is a descendant of Cain. And whereas Cain murdered Abel, Lamech, there was a boy who struck Lamech, and Lamech murdered him and basically bragged about it. And we'll look at that a little bit. So you've got already in those first few stories, you start with Adam and Eve's sin in the garden. And what did God warn? On the day you eat of it, you shall surely die. Sin brings death. And by the way, what happens in the very next story? Cain and Abel. Death because of sin. And then you go from there to not only just somebody acting in a moment of wrath, but now you have a man who is bragging about how tough he is and how he was able to execute this violence on this kid, basically just for hitting him. Like, you don't mess with Lamech, and bragging about it. You can just see how sin is just getting worse and worse. We're going to look at Genesis chapter 6. There's it's kind of a strange story at the beginning of Genesis chapter 6. It talks about the sons of God and the daughters of men. And there's some debates as far as exactly what this means, but it's ultimately, it's another example of mankind failing and repeating this, and sin getting worse, and the results get worse. And after you have this scene, then you have the entire world being filled with violence. And what did God do after the entire world was filled with violence in Genesis chapter 6? The rain starts coming down, and he washes the world clean. And you get your hopes up for this man, Noah. And you think, okay, we got a fresh start here. But then in Genesis chapter 9, you get another story about Noah that sometimes we don't talk about as much in our kids' Bible classes, where Noah goes and he gets drunk and he acts shamefully himself. And then you have the story of the Tower of Babel, which is basically, it kind of draws the connection from this downward spiral of sin to where by the time you get to chapter 11, the entire world is covered with nations that are basically founded in sin and rebellion. We're going to dig into all of those stories on Wednesday. All right, we're out of time. Thank y'all.